now for something completely different.
And now for something completely different, yes. This is completely different to the previous video. 3 shows missing from the archive, yes. This is where we're discussing from the British Comedy Guide website, which you can see just roughly. The 3 missing sitcom TV shows. The article was written by Rhianna Evans, published Monday the 1st of April 2024. Now we're going to read the article, talk about the programme, and give my own opinion on the show. So I'll read the article on that show, read all the information with it, and then give my opinion. I'll also talk about what it means by wiping from the archive throughout this video as well, because I'm an archive nerd, as well as a massive Doctor Who and comedy fan. Yes, anyway, so let's get into talking about this fantastic, incredible article. So, although it seems hard to believe now, yes, now in 2024, the BBC don't actually have an official video archive until around 1980. Tapes was expensive, or were expensive, and probably still are expensive. Yes, they are still expensive. They're still on a VHS play. More on that in another video on another channel. Anywho, back to our amazing, fantastic, glorious article. It was common practice to literally record over old programmes in order to make way for new ones. As a Doctor Who fan, you would know, if you're other Doctor Who fans, would know that archive, well, luckily, with Doctor Who fans record the audios, we could match the audios and try and clean up the audio and match it with some animation or telesnaps if we saw the images of the show. Or in order to make way for new ones, such as what has survived from the beginning of the BBC until the late 70s has been based on almost pure luck, and based on Verity Lambert, who is up there in Incredible People, but the person that also helped with the archive was Blue Peter's Biddy Baxter, because she went, can we save that? Can we save that? And if she hadn't said, can we save that, they wouldn't have saved Order Doctor Who and a lot of early Blue Peter, but the 15th Blue Peter they didn't save, but early enough Blue Peter from the 60s onwards. So, that was beside my point. Whilst many episodes have since been recovered, often from copies that were distributed overseas, yes, like India, America, New Zealand, Canada, Japan, China, they're the key countries that I can think of that had, the Philippines, funnily enough, I think it was Philippines, it's a fun story this, they had, found this can, which is what the film was in, a film can of Doctor Who, and they got there, and what they also found was an old Morecambe and Wise, but sadly they got there a little bit too late, because these things, if you don't distribute, you don't store cans, which is these circular discs with tape in them, if you don't store them properly or in a well ventilated area, the film on it could disintegrate. And they had got there, and they've got the Doctor episode, it was perfectly fine, and when they found the Morecambe Wise, because they got there just a little bit too late, and the Morecambe Wise had been properly destroyed by the poor condition the room was in, which is, funnily enough, well, not funny, but it's interesting enough that it links with this article, not technically with the first programme on this list, but it just fits with this article, full stop. So back where were we up to? Thousands of others are seemingly missing forever, commonly labelled as missing, believed, wiped. Join us as we look at the fascinating stories behind just 3 such comedies now sadly missing from the archive. Now, let's discuss our first point, and I already have made a point about this earlier, but our first point is Morecambe and Wise running wild. By the mid-50s, Morecambe and Wise were a double act who gained nationwide fame from both their stage and radio work. Their next step seemed obvious, yet for some reason this warning was repeatedly given to the pair You keep off TV, it'll do you no good. The duo first forayed into the world of BBC television was in 1954 with Running Wild, the entirety of which remained lost to time. However, the boys, Eric in particular, may well have considered this fact a blessing 5 days after the first broadcast of Scattergun, Sketchless variety format. A short review appeared in The People's Sunday the 25th of April 1954 from the critic Kenneth Bailey. It read simply, definition of the week. TV set, the box in which they buried Morecambe and Wise. Now, I'll be honest, 50s TV, 50s films, a lot of them are alive and well and hunky-dory, but 50s TV isn't really that well stayed. I know that the archive of the BBC from their BBC documentary from 2022, with the final episode of that aired earlier this year, they had, I don't know how I'll word this in a way that will explain my point properly, but they have kept a lot of their original stuff that says, like the first ever broadcast of Winston Churchill. They've kept the first ever radio broadcast ever, 2LO London House Calling. And I think that the 50s in general, I think a lot of comedy bits and bobs were saved, but the 60s were when everything was like the Frost Report. That was saved, and a lot of the early days of comedy, so from the Goodies to, well, I'll talk about it in another video, but there was a programme on Gold called My Favourite Sketch, where they talk about their favourite sketch. Sally Phillips would talk to a comedian, their favourite sketch, and then by the end of it, at the end of the episode, their favourite sketch of all time they would recreate. Now my favourite sketch of all time, somehow in a documentary survives, right? Very briefly in a documentary survives, and it's when the Goodies and the Pythons were together, and it's where, so you pan at this, like, you pan at these ballet dancers doing the ballet, and then it cuts to two men, like two Scottish men, pretending like they're at a football match, going, "Hooray!" So if I can ever find that clip, I'll make a whole video utilising that clip about that sketch, but that's beside the point. But the point was that a lot of 50s TV didn't survive. So, it has been the final nail in the coffin as far as Running Wild future was concerned. The situation was serious enough that the duo then agent Frank Pope wrote to the BBC demanding they pull the remaining episodes, but they refused, and the programme ran its conclusion. Morecambe and Wise may have thought it was all over, such as the impact down the line. Anyway, so then we move on to the second programme, right? So, okay, so let's start from here. There's words here. Right, so let's start from here so I can give you the name. Still, it's impossible for us to judge just how disappointing the series really was. The answer probably isn't as bad as it seemed. The television was in fact a dirt. Right, so let's go to a new sentence. Indeed, many shows from that era were subject to, well, not really surviving, such as Tony Hancock's first sketch show broadcast live on the newly launched ATV, which is now ITV, turns out to be much better than the Eric's The Morecambe and Wise Show. Tony Hancock does H.G. Wells' wiping phenomenon, but wasn't confined to television. Unfortunately, whilst the cost of storage was less of an issue, radio also suffered. Both mediums were considered. With no future value, one such audio victim aired on New Year's Eve 1956, The Man Who Could Work Miracles. It saw the grandfather of modern British comedy take on the grandfather of modern science fiction in one of radio's greatest and most unusual missing treasures. Comedy producer Dennis Main Walters penned an adaptation of the short and rather obscure H.G. Wells story published in 1898, which has been lauded as one of the first examples of fantasy, in literature, whatever. A film adaptation has been made in 1936, starring Ronald Young, but otherwise the narrative remains one of H.G. Wells' lesser-known works. It is the story of a man who disrupts the existence of miracle workers, only to find out that he is one of himself. So, starring Hancock with Kenneth Williams and Hattie Jakes, who had only just joined Hancock's half hour as regulars, and features Warren Mitchell, Charlie Lloyd Pack, Hugh Monton, and Fred Yule. This adaptation used Hancock's half hour music cues, becoming almost a fantasy edition of the classic radio sitcom. So, there you have it. So, radio has also been lost to time, and luckily enough, because scripts of these things still exist, a lot of adaptations and recasts of all these things have happened, because the old cast have still, the old cast sadly no longer with us, but the new casts are as good because it's the original scripts. No new lines added, no new nothing. It's just the original scripts. Now, because this video's dragging on slightly, we don't want this video to be like 4 million hours, I just want to give my opinion on that. I think, personally, that Hancock, Tony Hancock, is incredible, right? Alfred Hitchcock is also incredible, if you want my opinion on both. But Tony Hancock is amazing because Hancock's half hour, both on radio and television, is incredible. But I'll review that on its own one day in the future. Now, our final programme on this list, and our final programme we'll be discussing in this video, is Hugh Lloyd and Terry Scott in Gnomes of Dulwich. Jimmy Perry wasn't just one of British comedy's greatest and most prolific writers, he also loved gnomes. Who would have thought? Not me. I wouldn't have thought that, no. So much so that his wife's engagement, he spun one sketch, had penned for Morecambe Wise, into an entire sitcom about them. The 1969 children's series, produced by the great Sidney Lotterby, starred Hugh Lloyd and Terry Scott, who both enjoyed success as a double act throughout the 60s in Hugh and I. This was the last time they starred opposite each other on television. To say it was a strange send-off for the duo would be an understatement. There were two gnomes dressed in bright, shiny red hats. Jimmy Perry tried to explain the series in 2019. Terry Scott and Hugh Lloyd were two gnomes who would sit by a pond and comment on life, race, religion, and everything. It could become a little cult. John Cleese, Larry Leon, L-T-H-A-U, Andrea D. V-I-G-I-E-R, and, John Clive, sorry, not Cleves, John Clive, and Lynn Darby complete the cast, all of whom played bright, painted garden gnomes and various other garden knickknacks. There were a few guest stars who played human parts, such as Dad's Army's own Frank Williams, who recalled, "I was in an episode which was the gnomes had been purchased at a Labour Party BAZAAR by Maria Wilson, wife of the Prime Minister. They stood at ground level, compelling the legs of various guests at the garden party." And we move on to say all 6 episodes were inexplicably lost. We do have a few fragments of surviving audios, but that does not give us the full majesty of Hugh Lloyd and Terry Scott sitting around in plastic gnome outfits, being like the live action version of Ben, Bill, and then the Flower Pot Men. Now, because this has to be evidenced by an image, I have to show you the image, which you'll probably see in the thumbnail, but that is the image of the gnomes themselves. Now, personally, I would have liked to see that. And second of all, Hugh Lloyd and Terry Scott were, in other words, comic geniuses, right? A lot of classic British comedy were all comic geniuses. Like, a lot of people were comic geniuses, full stop. Just in general, a lot of comic geniuses were being played about and hanging about and were there. So I think that that type of sitcom could be remade if we could find, if Jimmy Perry knew personally, I can't remember if he died or not, but if we knew where the original scripts were, we could adapt it. Well, we couldn't adapt it, we could just remake it as a remake, but with the original scripts. So Gold could do it, for instance, because they did it with Dad's Army, and I think that would work really well. So there you have it. That is the top. That was, I'll tell you the name of the article again, just so I get it correct. That was 3 shows missing from the archive. Thank you guys for watching, and thank you guys for listening to my opinions and me reading the brilliant article from the amazing website, the British Comedy Guide. Thank you guys for watching. And remember, and now for something completely different.